My name is Roger Buck, and today we have an episode that was not supposed to happen. What was supposed to happen on this channel were two upcoming episodes on Findorn, which I visited in the summer, the New Age movement, and what I'm calling the occult replacement of Christianity. But those episodes are still being edited. The camera episodes take me a long time, and that's one reason that this episode is voice only, to try to keep my time shorter. Now, what we do have today, although it will be relevant to the occult replacement of Christianity, is really rather different. I have in mind a sort of potpourri of elements, a mixture, a medley of many different things. But certainly at the heart of this mixture and medley will be things to do with Valentin Tomberg, an extraordinary new book by Sebastian Morello, global materialism, and how materialism now infects the church, how even the church now is thinking in deeply materialistic terms, something that Sebastian Morello's book demonstrates in a brilliant and yet heartbreaking way. Extraordinary book by Sebastian. All right? And we will also be speaking about Christian Hermeticism. That will be in the heart of this medley. But there will be some personal elements. Some of you may feel that I am meandering too much. I'm going to provide a table of contents so that you can navigate, if you want, through what I have to say here. The more personal elements that will be here, I hope and pray they will both be there to help clarify my meaning as I navigate through all these things. But I also hope they will do more, including help those of you who are interested see where I'm going on this channel and where I feel I'm going in my deeper life work. Alright, those are church bells from a little Irish church directly across from my house, sounding the Angelus. I'm inserting these church bells into these voice-only episodes for a number of reasons, including separating segments that I record at different times. Now, strictly speaking, you don't need this little meandering, but I'm going to tell you that it's the next day now, and I'm scrapping something like almost an hour of recording I did yesterday, as I try to refine and contemplate where I'm going with this. And where I'm going with this, I think I want to return to the term the machine. I appropriated this term from Michael Martin, spoke about this in episode 41, as a way of shorthand for the ever increasingly soulless, materialistic, mechanical, automatic civilization that we seem to be entering into. That's what I mean by the machine. And I think it may be helpful in this episode to say that we are speaking about responses to the machine. Valentin Tomberg's entire work, including the early anthroposophical work that he later rejected and did not want republished, but also the later Catholic work, all of his work is a response to the growing mechanical nature of our civilization. What to do about this terrible, growing mechanical nature. Okay? And Sebastian Morello's extraordinary book, which we're coming to, is also a response to the machine, although he doesn't use that word there. That I've appropriated from Michael Martin. Michael Martin's Christian books that have so much value in them, even if I disagree with quite significant things at times with Michael, is also a response to the machine, and I would like to think that my own work is a response to the machine. I feel like I'm on a journey. And before we begin diving into more into Tomberg's and Sebastian Morello's responses to the machine, I want to just say this. The journey, these last months especially, has been very intense. Yeah, I mentioned that in the summer I was at the New Age community of Findhorn, where I lived as a young man, and this brought home to me more deeply than ever the terrible reality of the project to replace Christianity, the occult project, and other things in these last weeks and months, other encounters, I feel are sharpening my response to the machine. My own response to the machine owes everything to Valentin Tomberg over these last 27 years. It owes to his Catholic response to the machine, a response that combined, the aspiration to deep faithfulness to the church, to honoring the church, to honoring the supernatural gifts of unspeakable, miraculous nature that the church bestows on us through her sacraments each and every day. Honoring the need of the church for our salvation, as Tomberg comes back to time and time again. While at the same time honoring that what is going on in Tomberg's work is like a schooling of meditative exercises. And we're going to be speaking more in this episode about this schooling of meditative exercises. Tomberg's key book is, of course, called Meditations. This schooling, you could say, was the second prong of Tomberg's response to the world, the response to the machine. And this schooling, this meditative schooling, we'll be coming to this, owes a lot really, to Rudolf Steiner's earlier Hermetic work, which he called Anthroposophy. But Steiner tragically negated the church. According to Steiner, and this may be relevant later on, the Catholic Church had some kind of value up until the Renaissance, and after that, in his view, it should have died. There is unspeakable tragedy in what Rudolf Steiner put out there, and Tomberg, became very conscious of that tragedy. I see that. Nonetheless, Rudolf Steiner was also deeply concerned with the machine and was trying to find meditative ways, this is putting it a bit simplistically, that we could respond to the terrible growing machine-like nature of our civilization. We'll be expanding on that more, but maybe at this juncture it may be valuable to just really be very clear and emphatic about something. Even though I've labored it before in earlier episodes on Tomberg. Tomberg did not want his anthroposophical works reprinted. Tomberg actually speaks about his anthroposophy in very severe terms. There is a letter where he speaks about his anthroposophy from the first part of his life, anthroposophy, Christian anthroposophy, but without the church, Christian anthroposophy negating the church. He speaks about it as being totally alien. And in another piece of correspondence, he likens his anthroposophical efforts to the efforts of the Roman Emperor Julian the Apostate. And if you don't know, Julian the Apostate tried to return the Roman Empire to paganism. And Tomberg is saying in this fragment, I think it's a very important fragment, that he, Tomberg, was trying to breathe life into something that was dying. He means anthroposophy. This is back in the 1930s. And he likens himself to Julian the Apostate, trying to reverse the direction of the Roman Empire towards Christianity, trying to reverse it to a paganism that was dying. And in ways that may come out in this episode, we see again and again and again Tomberg refusing anthroposophy. All right? So, yeah, I want to say that all again at the outset. All right, I want to come to Sebastian's most amazing response to the machine. But I just want to say one last thing about Tomberg before I continue. I'm very aware that I may have people of an anthroposophical nature listening to this, and they may be objecting, well, Tomberg speaks about the church, but surely he doesn't mean, just the Catholic Church. Surely he's speaking about some kind of universal church. I hope that we will come to this later in the episode, but I have to say now that my thinking was very like these anthroposophists. I was an anthroposophist, for years. And I had to confront the fact that Tomberg again and again and again comes back to the idea of the Catholic Church, and basically an idea that is what the Church teaches, that the fullness of the Church, the Catholic Church, while aspects of that Church may exist or do exist in the Eastern Orthodox churches that have the sacraments, and so on and so forth, Tomberg was emphasizing the Catholic Church. And that's an extraordinarily difficult thing for anthroposophists to get their head around, precisely because Steiner had so, in my view now, tragically negated the importance of the Catholic Church and her sacraments. Tomberg is on a very different track, and I hope we'll be coming back to this in this episode, but so is Sebastian Morello. Okay? I really want to now begin to turn to Sebastian. I might actually say that I found myself unconsciously saying Sebastian, and maybe right now, for the purposes of transparency, it would be good to clarify my relationship to Sebastian. I'm about to say some effusive things about how important I think Sebastian's book is. And some of you might be imagining that, I'm really trying to plug, the work of a long, term friend of mine. No. I did not know Sebastian Morello when I read this book something like 2.5 months ago. I knew very little about him. I knew he was the editor of the European Conservative. I think I had seen him on a couple of programs with, Charles Coulombe and Joseph Shaw and Michael Martin, who may be coming into this episode in one way or another. So I was aware of Sebastian. But no, I did not know Sebastian. And it's now my privilege to be able to call him a friend. But what this has happened as a result of reading this extraordinary book, which I was made privy to and given access to something like a couple of months ago, maybe 2.5 months ago. And yeah, I've been speaking about how my journey in terms of response to the machine has been sharpening. Findhorn sharpened it. Reading Sebastian Morello's book something like 4 times now, because it does strike me as so important, is also another encounter sharpening my my own response to the machine. But look, let's get to the book itself for a bit. The book is published by Oz Justi Press, which is Peter Kwasniewski's new imprint, and the title doesn't seem to say anything about the machine. We're going to read it to you. As I say, Sebastian doesn't use this term, the machine. I've taken that from Michael Martin. But the title of the book is Mysticism, Magic, and Monasteries, Recovering the Sacred Mystery at the Heart of Reality. And obviously the most important thing here is the title. We'll come more to that. But really the subtitle here is really very important. Recovering the Sacred Mystery at the Heart of Reality. Because that is what we're losing in our increasingly mechanical world. This is what the book is really about. How do we come back to that? how do we come back to that? Well, unsurprisingly, I would say that Morello's answer stands in immense continuity with Tomberg's answer. We come back to it through the supernatural power of the Church, the supernatural grace that comes through the holy sacraments of the Church. But we also add to that meditative practice of a hermetic kind. Sebastian Morello is very explicit in this book that he is writing as a Christian hermeticist, as Tomberg was, and maybe here is the place to say something. I can't help feeling, this is why, my counter with the book was so intense, that, Tomberg finished his, Catholic and Hermetic books something like 60 years ago, and quite possibly we have in Sebastian Morello's book the most important continuation in English of Tomberg's Christian Hermetic project in 60 years. There is a real profound continuation here. And I say in English, the only thing in my mind that comes close to it is the kind of work that Michael Martin has done in certain respects to do with the sociological aspects of Tomberg's thinking. We've been into this in earlier episodes. I'm sorry, I'm going to say it again. Those works that insist on interpreting Tomberg through an anthroposophical lens that I fear certain people are too attached to, I can't give those works the same kind of significance as I can to Sebastian Morello or Michael Martin. I just can't. Those works are really upholding things that Tomberg deeply lamented. A little aside here, Tomberg just very clearly throws out the window. What Steiner is saying about Ahriman and Lucifer, we can't go into that right now, as dangerous, and these other books are really not holding sufficiently, anywhere near sufficiently, as far as I can see. Tomberg's refusal of anthroposophy. So I see Sebastian Morello, also Michael Martin, very, very much more on the track that Tomberg was on. In fact, mentioned this before, but Michael Martin, one of the things that I deeply respond to in his books that do draw on Tomberg is that he sees this transformation in Tomberg. I've mentioned this before, but he speaks about the Catholic Tomberg being bathed in the blood of the Lamb, that he was a different man. I'm laboring this, but it seems so key. And it seems so key, ladies and gentlemen, because I do care about the response to the machine. And I do see that Tomberg radically moving away from anthroposophy, was advocating a very different response to the growing and terrible machine-like nature of our society, and it's important, I think, to see that. But anyway, let us come, really to Sebastian's book now. I think I'll actually give you, the back cover blurb of the book. The back cover blurb of the book very much emphasizes the Church. I would say it's right to emphasize the Church, but this book isn't just about the Church. It's about so many things at once, as we'll come to. But anyway, here's a bit from the back, and we may break it up a bit, from the back cover blurb of the book. According to Sebastian Morello, the Church possesses the most potent resources for mystical transformation, with the event of the Incarnation and the outpouring of grace. It entailed radically altering the cosmic order, but we would hardly know it today. Let me just clarify that. The Church is meant to be about Christ's transformation of the cosmos, radically ordering the cosmic order. It's about his real presence in the sacraments. And what Sebastian Morello is saying in this book is the Church has lost so much in terms of proclaiming that, in terms of its faith in that, that this materialism has invaded the Church. Anyway, I'm going to continue from the blurb. A leaden blanket of rationalism, materialism, reductionism, The book is all about this leaden blanket of rationalism, materialism, reductionism. All that goes by the name of modernity has descended over this ancient treasury of divine wisdom and myopic pastoral programs which only intensify the despoilment and quashing of the Lord's kingdom, have eclipsed its innate appeal to the searching heart of modern man. I'm going to interject again. All this is relevant to what I'm saying about the occult replacement of Christianity, the New Age replacement. The fact that books like Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now can sell 16 million copies and be translated into 30 languages. People are thirsting, and we're meandering. The church's failure to witness to the supernatural reality that is at its heart is costing us dearly. In this ambitious and at times unconventional book, it is a very unconventional book, many will find it very contentious, Morello proposes a pathway of escape from what he calls the hex. It means the hex of materialism, towards a rediscovery of the sacred mystery at the heart of reality. Yes, the book is all about that, and it is about far more than that contains. In fact, when I received the book, 8-9 weeks ago, I found it to be something of a roller coaster of the book. It was moving so fast through all kinds of different territory. It was really quite dazzling. I had to, the minute I finished it, I started reading it again. I've now read it 3 or 4 times. There is so much in this book. And although I don't agree with everything in it, there's incredible gold in this book. It's an extraordinary performance. And I want to say that what we're going to be speaking about in this episode, just to be clear, again, it's a medley of elements. I want to bring in quite a lot, including things to do with Tomberg. So this is not going to be like a pure and straightforward review of Sebastian's book. No, it's going to, in fact, there's all kinds of things in Sebastian's book that I will not be probably commenting on at all. So, for example, the book is called Mysticism, Magic and Monasteries. I doubt I'll have much to say yet about monasteries, although it's a major theme in Sebastian's book. We are really only going to be approaching Sebastian's book from his wide-ranging roller coaster of a book, from certain angles that are very relevant to what I'm trying to do on this channel. And certainly, one of the elements here is, to do with Valentin Tomberg and Valentin Tomberg's project, as I call it in these episodes, a project that is all about Christian Hermeticism. All right, just by bringing up that single phrase, Christian Hermeticism, there's 2 broad sets of responses, I imagine, to that. Some of you will be very interested indeed. Others of you will be concerned because it will seem like I'm invoking something that does not honor the church. What Tomberg meant by that is intensely honoring of the church, and I hope to bring that out more. Really, the term refers to what I've been starting to get at in terms of meditative exercises, and you could say these meditative exercises, to come to the subtitle of Sebastian Morello's book, are again about recovering the sacred mystery at the heart of reality. So practices of prayer, contemplation, meditation. We're coming to that. But look, I think I want to interject right now. I warned you I'd meander. Skip ahead if you want. All of this is being born out of an intense journey These last few months particularly, I'd say since I was at the Findhorn community, encountering, New Agers, encountering the occult replacement of Christianity that, to be fair to the people at Findhorn, and I'm trying to bring this out in both the episodes that have been appeared and the ones that have not appeared yet, the people I met at Findhorn were very, very good, kind, decent people, who aren't sort of beavering away at the occult replacement of Christianity. This is probably too much of a digression. I'm with real needs to honor sincerity and goodness wherever I find it. But my encounters this last year, the last months particularly, are bringing profound questions up for me. And I'm going to just be a bit transparent here and say there are other encounters here. Some of them is, involve like the encounter with Sebastian's book. Reading a book 4 times is an encounter. And then there's encountering Michael Martin's work. And some of the things that I brought up, on the episodes where I spoke about Michael Martin. And then there are encountering other encounters going on here. And I want to say, and this isn't, about any one specific individual at all. I'm very concerned in general about much of the anger going on at the church from within the church. People feel this terrible disappointment in this worldly, materialistic church. A church that, as the back cover of the book speaks, is, has now a leaden blanket of rationalism, materialism, reductionism. Some of you listening to this will really understand that. I can imagine other Catholics listening to this and saying, well, what do you mean the church is under a leaden blanket of rationalism, materialism, reductionism? Read Sebastian's book. It really, really brings that out. And I mean to come back to this. And the book is, as I say, brilliant in its way, and it's heartbreaking. But as much as, also the episodes with Michael Martin, I'm really with issues of what do we do? What do we really, really do with our disappointment with a church that, seems to be increasingly woke, increasingly materialistic, increasingly lost. These are very, very deep things for me, and they're going on. They're going on in the background of everything I say here, because I'm very conscious, that part of Tomberg's answer, and you can say Tomberg lived in a different era, but doesn't wash for me. Part of Tomberg's answer involved intensely honoring the Catholic Church. In fact, Tomberg goes out of his way, and I want to come back to this in this episode, to say that if you really understand the supernatural miracle of the Church, if you really feel its grace, you will never throw stones in it, in thought, word, or deed. And I do want to be concerned about that. I am concerned, just like Sebastian Morello is, about this hidden materialism in the Church. But I don't want to throw stones in thought, word, or deed, at even modern expressions of Catholicism that I do question. And as I'm making this, episode, I'm really noticing that I need to question myself, and there's a lot going on here. But let's just stay with this right now. I want to also speak about, for those of you who are really very deeply concerned about Christian Hermeticism, and you have real reason to be concerned, and I mean to address that in this episode as well. I really do. I want to say some things about that. But it really truly depends on what we mean by Hermeticism. And I think what I want to do is read you a brief passage from Morello's book, Sebastian's book, where he deals with this, because the problem is that the term Hermeticism, it's something that is elastic. It's easily stretched beyond all definition. Anyway, here is what Sebastian says. Typically, Christians are uneasy at any mention of Hermeticism or esotericism. This is understandable, for such terms have come to mean anything that is not modern mainstream Christian spirituality. In this way, Hermeticism is rather like the term alternative medicine, which doesn't tell you what it is, but what it's not. Namely, not modern mainstream medicine. Thus, alternative medicine can mean anything from eating cooked elderberries to support one's immune system to Reiki. Likewise, depending on what one is reading, Hermetic or esoteric could mean anything from the Tombergian practice of concentration without effort. And Morello says this is a practice similar to those recommended in Jean-Pierre de Caussade's Abandonment to Divine Providence, to the demonic sex magic of Aleister Crowley. All right, so many things could be put under the name of Hermetic. Maybe I just make a little note on what Sebastian has just said there about Tombergian practice of concentration without effort. We've spoken about this in these episodes before, where Tomberg speaks about, have you ever drunk silence? Tomberg is speaking about a need to cultivate a practice of silence, where the waves of silence become so deep that it is like drinking silence. That is what Tomberg says is at the heart of Christian Hermeticism, and we're coming back to that. But given all these kinds of problems, one thing that I'm very fond of that Sebastian has done here is that he has named in a single very good sentence, I think, what he means by Hermetic. And I'll read you it. What I mean by Hermetic is a set of practices and disciplines of mind, will, and imagination that habituate the practitioner to a vision of the world that acknowledges it as God's icon. There's a lot in that single sentence. In terms of seeing the world as God's icon, Sebastian Morello is speaking about seeing God's creation, even though that creation has been partially destroyed by sin, partially destroyed by the fall, it still speaks to the glory and splendor of God, of the creation, and we can understand, God through that. And that is very key to what Tomberg is speaking about. He speaks about Hermeticists as being theologians of the world, as opposed to theologians of Scripture. That Hermeticists are those who try to understand and see God through the world. But we can really ponder this wonderful sentence from Sebastian here. A set of practices and disciplines of mind, will, and imagination. These are practices to do with how we think, how we imagine the world, what we do in the world, that lead us to really seeing the glory of God, through the creation, even though it's a fallen creation. Tomberg is very much about the same thing. It's quite a lot later now, and before we go on, I wonder if I might just be allowed a little personal digression, and maybe it's just helpful to say now that this episode is being born in some pretty intense processes. In fact, the last weeks and months have been very intense for me, going right back to my time at my return to the New Age community of Findhorn back in the summer. And because things have been so intense, that's partly why I haven't got the further episodes out about Findhorn and the occult replacement of Christianity. Haven't been able to edit them. And this particular episode, I just want to say that I'm trying to turn it around It's something like almost breakneck speed by my standards. I might even have it up in, from the time I started, 36 hours, maybe 48. That's extraordinary for me. Usually what I say takes a lot more reflection and working out. So I'm a little bit conscious that some of this may be sloppier than I would like. And I feel like I should just back up a little bit because some of you, when I speak about Tomberg speaking about Hermeticists as theologians of the world versus ordinary theologians who are theologians of Scripture, i.e., theologians try to discern God through Scripture, and Hermeticists try to discern God through the world, that may sound very strange. I hope it will become a little bit clearer as we proceed, as will also, what Sebastian Morello means by practices of, thinking and imagination and so forth. But maybe just in an effort to make this slightly clearer at this point, it may be useful to point out that Hermeticism is seen as going back to the legendary Egyptian sage Hermes Trismegistus, of whom there's a fragment called the Emerald Table, and the most famous statement from that, many of you will know this very well, is as above, so below, that the heavens above are reflected in this world below, however imperfectly. There are correspondences between above and below, and the current of Hermeticism is about, you could say, maybe I'm being a bit sloppy, looking at the correspondences to see the glory of God. But having made that statement, I think I need to bring in something else that is going to be relevant here. The kinds of things that Tomberg is speaking about in terms of Hermeticism involve not simply, the glory of God in the world, but also understanding what ails the world, what is ill in the world, what very, very deep processes in the world that aren't necessarily going to be produced by, empiricism or rationalism. The insights are not going to be yielded through our, the kinds of empirical and rational processes that have become so important to us over just the last 3 or 4 centuries. People like Tomberg, Hermeticists like Tomberg and Morello, would say no. These kinds of empirical, rationalist, and materialist processes are more likely to obscure our vision of what is truly going on. So Hermeticism is about a search for truth, the truth of the world. Maybe I just say this as well. An argument that Sebastian Morello is making in the book, and Tomberg has made before him, is that Christianity recognized that there was tremendous value in pagans like Plato and Aristotle. And its approach to Plato and Aristotle was not to sort of throw them in the dustbin as useless, but was to baptize them, so to speak, Christianize them. And what we're about in both Sebastian Morello's book and in Tomberg's work is, can Hermeticism be baptized in the way that Plato was baptized, so to speak? Can Hermes Trismegistus be baptized? We'll be coming back. We'll be coming back to this as the episode goes on. All right. I'm conscious that there could be, Catholics, Christians listening to this, scratching their heads. Well, why do we need to baptize Hermes Trismegistus? Why do we need theologians of the world? Why aren't ordinary theologians of Scripture sufficient? Why aren't the sacraments of the Church, the greatest miracle on earth, sufficient? I mean, why do we need these things? Well, I hope this will come clearer as I proceed. But as an oblique way of throwing out something that is an oblique response to these questions right now, I'm going to throw out a couple of questions. Why is it that only now, in the 21st century, Are people confused about whether they're a man or a woman or not? Okay, maybe there were cases before the 21st century, but it's now a mass phenomenon. Is it simply because mass media is, promoting this everywhere, and simply because, we can now, pump our bodies full of testosterone or estrogen or whatever, and operate and mutilate ourselves? Why now? Can that sufficiently be explained simply by new technology? I'm going to throw out another question. Why was it that it was only really in the beginning, and this is relevant to everywhere we're going in this episode. It's relevant to Sebastian Morello's book, it's relevant to Tomberg. Why was it that it was only at the beginning of the 16th century, that 1500s, that people en masse in the West began to question for the first time whether the Eucharist was truly his body and his blood, or whether it was only a symbol? Why was it only in the beginning of the 1500s that people en masse began to think, well, this might only be a symbol? And virtually no Christians before that had ever thought this before. Why did it only occur there? Well, you can come up with certain things. You can certainly think about, the printing press and, all kinds of things. Spreading, new ways of thinking, so on and so forth. What Hermeticists would say, like Tomberg, and I would say also Rudolf Steiner before him, we may say more about Steiner, is that these answers aren't deep enough. They're too superficial. Answers to huge world problems like that can't be answered through empiricist or rationalist inquiry. We need ways of looking deeper. And what Valentin Tomberg would be saying would be that Hermeticism is a way of looking deeper into very deep questions about what is really going on. Or similarly, the great revolutions, whether it's like 1789 in France, but also before it, 1688 in England or 1649, these great revolutions that destroyed the old order. Why did they only happen then? Why did this destruction of hierarchy only start happening in the 17th century? Tomberg is all about peering into very deep questions like that, because in the immense materialism that we face today, and which Sebastian Morello is arguing quite correctly, I think is not only killing us, but is now really threatening the church, we have to go back deeper. One of the threads that I think is very important among all kinds of gold in Sebastian Morello's book. But, there are many traditionalists, Catholic traditionalists, who will simply fault Vatican II. They will simply say, all our problems just go back to Vatican II, and before that we were all right. Something that certain traditionalists reading Sebastian Morello's book will be surprised to find is that Sebastian Morello is looking at the roots of Vatican II long, long before Vatican II. Going back centuries, in fact. And it's all to do with how did a modern mind emerge which became doubting and skeptical and empirical and rationalist and excluding the supernatural. And so the supernatural began to be excluded in Protestantism. Protestantism began to think of the sacraments as only symbols. And then pretty soon, by the 19th century, and I'm putting this all a little bit sloppily, for reasons I've stated, by the 19th century, you had liberal Protestantism, and it was beginning to declare that, miracles were impossible. People like Rudolf Bultmann, very influential liberal Protestant of the early 20th century, arguing to demythologize Christianity. All this, begins emerging in the 19th century, but it has roots back before that. Protestantism began with this scepticism of the supernatural nature of the sacraments. Morello's really amazing, dazzling roller coaster of a book, although it covers a lot of territory and it covers it very quickly, is going into these deeper questions, looking at the problem of the church, in a deeper way. So here you have at Vatican II, you have liberal theologians, beginning to emerge, people like Karl Rahner, running around, Vatican II and being a bit sloppy here, but, really arguing that we have to get rid of the Virgin Mary, out of ecumenical sensitivity to Protestants. I am being a bit sloppy here, but, one of the things, for example, that, and we can't spend time on it now, but one of the many things Sebastian Morello is doing in the book is looking at how Karl Rahner, this liberal Catholic, who, with a number of other people like, Hans Küng and Schillebeeckx and other people were so influential at Vatican II, how did they become this way? How did they become this way? Sebastian Morello is asking very deep questions in this very special book, just like Valentin Tomberg was asking very deep questions about, you could say, the soul of the world. What ails the soul of the world? I'll just speak about Tomberg now, as I've been with him for 27 years, because I've been with Tomberg's thinking for 27 years, and I've only been with Sebastian Morello's thinking for 9 or 10 weeks now. What became obvious to me as I spent time with Tomberg is that he was not satisfied with answers that were simplistic. So we have, from the blurb on the back of Sebastian's book, he speaks about a leaden blanket of rationalism, materialism, and reductionism. Tomberg was not interested in rationalist answers. He was not interested in materialist answers. He was not interested in reductionist answers. He was looking for deep, deep things to understand what was, you could say, figuratively, what was ailing the soul of the world. Why is the soul of the world becoming sick with materialism? He speaks about this in Meditations on the Tarot, that all these revolutions, including the scientific revolution, are drying up, turning the West, the soul of the West, into like a desert. And why is this happening? Alright, I'm going to read you something here now, and it's not actually from Valentin Tomberg, it's from St. John Paul II. Something brief, but I think it really expresses something that Tomberg would have seen very clearly eye to eye with St. John Paul II, and it's also relevant to Sebastian Morello, because what we're going to read, and you'll see why we're getting at it, is to do with Descartes, 17th century, early 17th century French philosopher who changed everything. At least we think he did. Sebastian goes a lot into Cartesian philosophy in the book, and it's just yet another one of the things he's kind of cartwheeling his way through in this sort of wild ride of a wonderful book. But look, yeah, we'll get to why this is relevant in a minute. Just give you just a few sentences from St. John Paul II. This is from Crossing the Threshold of Hope, where St. John Paul II is saying that he wants to look at the history of European thought after Descartes. And then he says, I put Descartes in the forefront because he marks the beginning of a new era in the history of European thought, and because this philosopher inaugurated, I'm truncating this a bit to make it slightly simpler, the great anthropocentric shift in philosophy. I think, therefore I am, is the motto of modern rationalism. Let's just clarify that for anyone who might like me to clarify it. So he has great anthropocentric shift in philosophy in italics, and clearly he's drawing attention to the fact that before Descartes, the philosophy of the Middle Ages, the medieval era, was not anthropocentric, it was theocentric. It was centered on God, not the human mind. But after Descartes, it becomes anthropocentric, and it becomes rationalist. And St. John Paul II goes on to say, all the rationalism of the last centuries, as much in its Anglo-Saxon expression as in its continental expression in Kantianism, Hegelianism, and the German philosophy of the 19th and 20th centuries, up to Husserl and Heidegger, can be considered a continuation and expansion of Cartesian positions. And I'll truncate a bit, but he's basically saying that from Descartes onwards, we become focused on our own subjective. What is human? What is human? Anthropocentric. Descartes marks the beginning of the development of the exact and natural sciences, as well as of the humanistic sciences in their new expression. He turns his back on metaphysics, though the father of modern rationalism certainly cannot be blamed for the move away from Christianity. It is difficult not to acknowledge that he created the climate in which, in the modern era, such an estrangement became possible. Sebastian Morello disagrees. We'll come to that in just a moment. It did not happen right away, but gradually. In fact, about 150 years after Descartes, all that was fundamentally Christian in the tradition of European thought had already been pushed aside. This was the time of the Enlightenment in France, when pure rationalism held sway. The French Revolution during the Reign of Terror knocked down the altars dedicated to Christ, tossed crucifixes into the streets, introduced the cult of the goddess Reason. On the basis of this, there was a proclamation of liberty, equality, and fraternity. He goes on to say how Christianity was destroyed in the process. We won't read more. But I just said, tantalizingly perhaps, that Sebastian Morello, in a sense, disagrees with this. Why? Because he is not looking at Descartes as the causal factor here. We have it in our minds to think, well, Descartes, initiates this new anthropocentric, way of philosophy. And out of that, so much flows. I wanted to read that partly to point to the fact that what Sebastian Morello is saying in this book is that no, something deeper than Descartes happened, something that preceded Descartes. He is suggesting in this book that Descartes only expresses what you could call a new mind, or I said a little while ago, the modern mind. Making a distinction between the modern mind and the medieval mind. What I'm trying to get at here is I've been introducing these kind of huge questions, like why all of a sudden, do we suddenly think, that if I pump myself with estrogen and operate on myself, or, God knows what, I can become a woman. Forgive me, I'm a bit sloppy here. I don't know all the science of it. Might have things wrong there. All down millennia, people have not thought like that. But we now have, an idea that, it's all down to us. It's not down to God, it's not down to nature, it's down to us. Subjectivism. And I threw out questions before, like, why at the beginning of the 16th century did all kinds of people across Northern Europe particularly begin saying, well, the Eucharist, that's only a symbol. Why did they never say this before? There are huge questions that we will not be able to do justice to in this, episode that I'm doing. But again, why did Cartesian philosophy emerge and completely displace the old scholastic philosophy, or the old, philosophy of antiquity that was God-centered? What I'm going to suggest here, it's certainly what Tomberg thinks, is that a new mind emerged, a modern mind emerged, and that modern mind cannot be explained by simply, empirical and rationalist analysis. One has to go deeper. One has to look deeper, if you like, into the soul of the world to understand why these things are changing. And then so this is a roundabout way of answering, why do we need Hermeticists? Why do we need Hermeticists of the soul of the world? Well, if this is true, if the true causal factors here of the terrible materialism and the terrible distress that we are facing, emerge from a new modern mind that mysteriously emerges, around the 16th century and can no longer take the sacraments seriously, at least in certain parts of Europe, which then become, England and so on, become the culturally dominant parts of the West. Huge, deep questions here. But basically, without being able to go further into those questions, I'm trying to explain, certainly for Tomberg, that Hermeticism is needed to address those kinds of questions that go deeper than collectors of data and analysts of data and empiricists can find. That is what he is suggesting Hermeticism is about. And then if what we're really dealing with is this very mysterious emergence of the modern mind, and Sebastian Morello is getting it, something like the same in his book. As I say, I've been with Tomberg 27 years. Then we can ask, well, what do we do about it? What do we do about it? What do we do about it if we really begin to think the medieval mind, in that vast, silent medieval world, could maybe see things of reality better than we can. I could bring in so much here. Charles Taylor, author of A Secular Age. It's something of a masterpiece. I don't agree with it in many ways as well, but he speaks about modern humanity becoming buffered. I've got things about Charles Taylor on the website, The Secular Age. Buffered from reality. We are becoming more and more materialistic, and we need to understand what that's really about. We also need to see how it's coming into the church, because this is the point, I was saying with Sebastian Morello, saying, why did Karl Rahner become this way? Because one of the things Sebastian points out in the book is that Karl Rahner is all in favor of Descartes' anthropocentric shift, anthropological, approach. Sebastian Morello is a Hermeticist attempting to go deeper and deeper and deeper into these things. And the book is filled with gold. And it's necessary for us to sort of try to mine that gold if we're then going to ask, what do we do about it? How do we emerge from materialism? What I have come to feel after being with Tomberg's Christian Hermetic works for 27 years is that he was trying to suggest a way forward, that we could overcome these leaden processes of rationalism, materialism, reductionism, that, by the way, Sebastian Morello is acutely diagnosing in this book. Again, I want to say the book is like a roller coaster. There is so much here that I will not be able to properly address, in this particular episode. We may come to more of it in other episodes. But, look, I think I want to do something here. Everything I'm speaking about is trying to do with getting like a deeper grip on these things. Not being satisfied with superficial answers about why did people suddenly lose faith in the sacraments at the beginning of the 16th century. Why did this happen? Medieval man had faith, and maybe medieval man, and this is also a key and for some people contentious aspect of Sebastian Morello's book, maybe the medieval mind could see and feel and understand things in that great silence of the medieval world that we cannot understand. Maybe the medieval mind sees and understands and feels things that we cannot. All right, what I want to do now is just read you a few sentences from a manuscript that I'm working on at the moment. Not sure what will happen to this manuscript, but it goes further towards explaining, I hope, what Sebastian Morello means by Hermeticism as a set of practices to deepen our understanding of the world. And we've already mentioned how Tomberg begins with concentration without effort, with finding a silence. Maybe it's worth reiterating. Tomberg both speaks about the need to reach a kind of silence where the mind becomes still, but then he speaks about this not just in individual periods of prayer, but he speaks about a zone of silence being established in the soul that eventually becomes present all the time, so that in some way the person, when he or she looks at the world, even in outer activity, still has this silence present in the soul, that he is engaging with the world without all the kind of chatter and clutter and craziness that goes on in our ordinary thinking, that he can behold the world with, silence present in his soul. I'm not going to be able to do justice to that in the way that I would like, but let me read you a few sentences from this manuscript in progress. So I'm saying that Tomberg was concerned with, quote, concentrated ways of seeing the world and listening to the world that utilitarian rationalists, obsessed with quantities and measurements, close their mind to. The kind of exercises that he's speaking about, well, let's say this. Tomberg's key book is, of course, called Meditations. It's all about meditations. And whether this involves contemplating symbols I've written, contemplating the sacred liturgy of the Church, contemplating Holy Scripture, or our dreams, or other subtle forms of experience, or simply listening, really deeply listening to the loved ones and everyday folk that divine providence no doubt brings to us for a purpose. Providence also brings events that unexpectedly steal into our lives. Listen to these. They too are part of the world. What is revealed if we carefully contemplate their meaning? I'm going to interrupt my reading for a little aside. I've been going through, I'm going to come to this later in the episode, something of a crisis. The last weeks of my life have been last months really, have been very intense. I could just look at that superficially and sort of say, oh well, a lot of different stresses came together, maybe certain people did things, blah, 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 blah. Or I could look at these last very, very, in some ways, very difficult weeks of my life, weeks and months, and say, what is the meaning of this? Why is this going on? What's really happening here? And maybe I could, pray, Lord, why am I faced with these difficulties over the last months? I could make an inquiry. So Tomberg here is speaking about inquiring into the world, listening to the world. One can try to inquire into the events of one's own life, or one could try to inquire into the events of the world, like why do men and women no longer think they're men and women? Picking up my manuscript, what is revealed if we carefully contemplate these things? Might we detect angels ministering to us at times? And let us carefully contemplate too God's glory in the sun, the stars, the moon, mountains and oceans. And do not forget the tiny flowers by the wayside. The world is profound. Attend to its profundity. Make a discipline of this. Given practice, our hearts and minds can recover the vision medieval man naturally possessed before we moderns, quote unquote, found out better. Before we modern people began to become rationalistic, materialistic, and reductionistic. Given practice, regular, sustained, methodical practice of the sort I just described, we can attain heightened sensitivity to the world. It is a world which, no doubt, waits for our love, Make sure then that moral striving to serve God and the world fills your practice. If you do, you will have arrived at Tomberg's own understanding of Hermeticism, at least its ideal essence. Okay? What Tomberg is encouraging is a very, very deep, disciplined form of attention or forms of attention to the world. This is also what Sebastian Morello is encouraging. Alright, it's a bit later now. I've been contemplating how to continue. I think I really want to link all of this more strongly to silence. The more we have silence in our soul, what Tomberg speaks about as a zone of silence, in other words, the less our attention is cluttered with our own agendas, our own biases, our own prejudices, can we listen to another human being, for example, with a certain level of silence in our soul, a silence that doesn't judge them, that doesn't interpret them, but just seeks to be aware of them. Tomberg has much in the book, in his writings, in his Christian Hermetic writings, about really taking in the reality of another human being, seeing that human being as a separate and autonomous being, without projecting your agendas onto him. This is the work of love, and it's a very deep and difficult work because we are so fallen, because we are so radically broken and fallen. And he suggests that we need both the church, the sacraments of the church for this, and silence. And I want to read you just a little bit from Tomberg's opening letter in his meditations, which he says is the key. This meditation is the key to all the other meditations. So just a few lines, I'm going to truncate some of them. Concentration as the faculty of fixing maximum attention on a minimum amount of space, he writes, and he quotes Goethe here, saying that Goethe said that anyone who wants to complete something of worth and of skill quietly and unceasingly directs the greatest force upon the smallest point is the practical key to all success in every domain. Tomberg is saying concentration. But usually it takes effort. It takes effort to concentrate. Tomberg is suggesting that there is a form of concentration that doesn't take effort. He relates it very deeply to love and what he calls the moral purification of the will. Concentration without effort. That is to say, where there is nothing to suppress, and where contemplation becomes as natural as breathing and the beating of the heart, is the state of consciousness, thought, imagination, feeling, and will, of profound silence, of desires, of preoccupations, of the imagination, of the memory, and of discursive thought. One may say that the entire being becomes like the surface of calm water, reflecting the immense presence of the starry sky and its indescribable harmony. And the waters are deep, they are so deep, and the silence grows, ever increasing. What silence? Its growth takes place through regular waves which pass, one after the other, through your being, one wave of silence followed by another wave of more profound silence, then again a wave of still more profound silence. Have you ever drunk silence? If in the affirmative, you know what concentration without effort is. A little personal note. My 27 years with Tomberg have led me to at least aspire to this more and more. And what I have found is that the sacraments of the Church are... I can't even find the words. The sacraments of the Church, for me, are indispensable for this. I find myself when I have entered into the deepest concentration without effort, it is thanks to the sacraments of the Church. And Eucharistic adoration is also something very, very key for me in terms of dropping into, letting go, entering into this silence. So much might be said here. As I think I've been intimating already, there's a lot going on in my personal life these last weeks and months. Some of it very intense, some of it to do with some of the issues in Sebastian Morello's book. I'm very concerned at the levels of very understandable anger and rage going on towards the Church. And I mean here, within Catholics. But I'm returning to what I invoked earlier, Tomberg speaking about if you really understand the supernatural graces of the Church, if you really see what the Church is doing, never will you want to throw stones in thought, mind, deeds against the Church. He speaks about the Church creating an atmosphere of like spiritual ozone in the world. We live in a world, ladies and gentlemen, where hundreds of thousands of times a day the Eucharist is celebrated. I've said this before, that the Catholic Church has something like 400,000 priests. I don't know how many priests the Orthodox have, but this means that we can be sure, the Catholics celebrate the Eucharist every day, across the planet, maybe a couple of 100,000 times a day. Christ's body and blood is becoming present on the altars of the world. We can look at the Church in all the terrible failings of her clerics and priests and bishops, and it's not that all those things aren't true. It's that the Church is a supernatural mystery, and somehow growing out of everything I'm with, which may become clearer by the end of this episode, I'm very concerned that people are losing sight of the supernatural side of the Church while they are focused, with understandable anger and pain about what's going on in the Church. Alright, it's a bit later now. I've been contemplating how to continue. I think I really want to link all of this more strongly to silence. The more we have silence in our soul, what Tomberg speaks about as a zone of silence, in other words, the less our attention is cluttered with our own agendas, our own biases, our own prejudices, can we listen to another human being, for example, with a certain level of silence in our soul, a silence that doesn't judge them, that doesn't interpret them, but just seeks to be aware of them. Tomberg has much in the book, in his writings, in his Christian Hermetic writings, about really taking in the reality of another human being, seeing that human being as a separate and autonomous being, without projecting your agendas onto him. This is the work of love, and it's a very deep and difficult work because we are so fallen, because we are so radically broken and fallen. And he suggests that we need both the Church, the sacraments of the Church for this, and silence. And I want to read you just a little bit from Tomberg's opening letter in his meditations, which he says is the key. This meditation is the key to all the other meditations. So just a few lines, I'm going to truncate some of them. Concentration as the faculty of fixing maximum attention on a minimum amount of space, he writes, and he quotes Goethe here, saying that Goethe said that anyone who wants to complete something of worth and of skill quietly and unceasingly directs the greatest force upon the smallest point is the practical key to all success in every domain. Tomberg is saying concentration. But usually it takes effort. It takes effort to concentrate. Tomberg is suggesting that there is a form of concentration that doesn't take effort. He relates it very deeply to love and what he calls the moral purification of the will. Concentration without effort. That is to say, where there is nothing to suppress, and where contemplation becomes as natural as breathing and the beating of the heart, is the state of consciousness, thought, imagination, feeling, and will, of profound silence, of desires, of preoccupations, of the imagination, of the memory, and of discursive thought. One may say that the entire being becomes like the surface of calm water, reflecting the immense presence of the starry sky and its indescribable harmony. And the waters are deep, they are so deep, and the silence grows, ever increasing. What silence? Its growth takes place through regular waves which pass, one after the other, through your being, one wave of silence followed by another wave of more profound silence, then again a wave of still more profound silence. Have you ever drunk silence? If in the affirmative, you know what concentration without effort is. A little personal note. My 27 years with Tomberg have led me to at least aspire to this more and more. And what I have found is that the sacraments of the Church are... I can't even find the words. The sacraments of the Church, for me, are indispensable for this. I find myself when I have entered into the deepest concentration without effort, it is thanks to the sacraments of the Church. And Eucharistic adoration is also something very, very key for me in terms of dropping into, letting go, entering into this silence. So much might be said here. As I think I've been intimating already, there's a lot going on in my personal life these last weeks and months. Some of it very intense, some of it to do with some of the issues in Sebastian Morello's book. I'm very concerned at the levels of very understandable anger and rage going on towards the Church. And I mean here, within Catholics. But I'm returning to what I invoked earlier, Tomberg speaking about if you really understand the supernatural graces of the Church, if you really see what the Church is doing, never will you want to throw stones in thought, mind, deeds against the Church. He speaks about the Church creating an atmosphere of like spiritual ozone in the world. We live in a world, ladies and gentlemen, where hundreds of thousands of times a day the Eucharist is celebrated. I've said this before, that the Catholic Church has something like 400,000 priests. I don't know how many priests the Orthodox have, but this means that we can be sure, the Catholics celebrate the Eucharist every day, across the planet, maybe a couple of 100,000 times a day. Christ's body and blood is becoming present on the altars of the world. We can look at the Church in all the terrible failings of her clerics and priests and bishops, and it's not that all those things aren't true. It's that the Church is a supernatural mystery, and somehow growing out of everything I'm with, which may become clearer by the end of this episode. As I said, I've promised some personal meandering, which you can either skip through or you can listen to as you see fit. I'm very concerned that people are losing sight of the supernatural side of the Church while they are focused, with understandable anger and pain about what's going on in the church. Alright, this wasn't in the plan, but as I contemplate how to go forward, I'm going to repeat something that's been in an earlier episode where I spoke about Michael Martin's writings and how very much I've gained from them. And in that episode and in this episode now, I'm going to quote just a little paragraph from his book Sophia in Exile, and you'll see why, I hope. The tragic fire at Notre Dame de Paris on 15th of April 2019 is a fitting icon for a church in distress, suffering from the weight of its own corruption, not least the ongoing sex scandals that fill us with shame and anger, evidence as they are of an ecclesial structure inured to the suffering of its victims, and further complicated by the manner in which some of its most powerful leaders have continued to shield their own from scrutiny. These are symptoms of a deeper pathology. The hierarchy's inept and milquetoasty response to the global pandemic that began in early 2020 only further betrays how indifference has become a cardinal virtue. How many millions died without receiving the last sacraments? How many more left the church permanently because it was too hard for the hierarchy to live out the gospel and too easy to play the political sycophant? Very articulate, very powerful words from a man, and I'm sure I was commenting on this in the Michael Martin episode, a man I also know a little bit, from a heart in pain. And look, ladies and gentlemen, I've gone through some intense processes these last months. I've gone through intense processes going to Findhorn in the summer, really looking at what I'm calling, really almost like facing it for the first time, the occult replacement of Christianity. And then things have continued through the last weeks. There is a story here, underneath everything I'm saying. What the story brings up for me, and maybe helps explain just a little bit of what's going on here, is I do see the occult replacement of Christianity that I have been speaking about. I do see the world becoming more and more materialistic. I see the church becoming materialistic in the way that both Sebastian Morello in this extraordinary book identifies, and also Michael Martin in his books identify, in very eloquent terms. I feel the pain in my heart that is present in Michael Martin's books and is present in Sebastian Morello's book. And I've said this before, but I want to say it again. I'm glad that people are not numb to this pain. There are all kinds of people these days becoming disillusioned with the church, because of the very things that Michael Martin's heart and pain identifies there. And I've had to notice in my whole story that I could never abandon the church in any way. I need these sacraments. I need the ozone. I need the supernatural reality that Tomberg speaks about so eloquently, that the sacraments of the church bring forth. I need this for my own practice of concentration without effort, for my own, aspiration, to the kind of hermetic practice that Sebastian Morello is speaking about. My whole life is about this miracle of the church, and turning to the church more and more deeply through the sacraments, through going to adoration, through going to the Mass as frequently as possible, through going to confession, and for all kinds of reasons, that are beyond anything I can cover here. over these last few months, beginning in Findhorn, beginning with what I've been saying about the occult replacement of Christianity, all of this becomes more pressing on me, and I'm glad it becomes more pressing on me than it ever has done before. Alright, we're going to begin approaching the end here, and it's going to be a more abrupt end than I'd planned. I'd been laying things out. I was hoping to expand on certain things. I'm afraid there are going to be some loose ends here. We'll see what we can do to tie some things up. I recall mentioning earlier that Christians and Catholics had every right to be concerned about Hermeticism, and I promised to say a bit more about that. We really aren't going to go into that now, another episode I think, but I will just say this. Tomberg's Meditations book, every single chapter, I would say, has passages warning about the kind of traps and dangers that Hermeticists fall into. The principal danger that he warns about again and again and again is arrogance and grandiosity of thinking to know better than the church, know better than the academy. I really, will just point to Tomberg's constant warnings of the danger of Hermeticism. That's really all I'm going to say now. There's information in the other episodes, but I think I want to say this because I do feel like, and I've said this before, people are reading Tomberg very selectively. They're ignoring those kinds of things where he's warning against Hermeticism, or he's warning against, certain anthroposophical patterns. The careful reader, some of it's very obvious indeed, warning against, the whole anthroposophical idea. We won't detail this now of Ahriman and Lucifer. Some of it is more subtle. But, I fear that there is a kind of progressive New Age type, and I know this type because I was one myself, very much one myself, who kind of screens out everything that Tomberg says that isn't very New Agey or isn't very progressive. And as I've said on previous episodes, Tomberg was a Russian. He wasn't a sort of, a Russian born in 1900. He wasn't a kind of modern 21st century Anglo-American New Age, progressive. Progressive things are being projected onto Tomberg. And I think he has to be listened to very, very carefully. Because these things are important. Another sort of set of loose ends that relates to this that I'm not really going to be able to tie up now. I had hoped to say more. I've been saying throughout this episode how much I've been going through a kind of personal story that's been very intense, over the last months since I went to Findhorn. A story that was really sharpening my awareness of the occult replacement of Christianity, and sharpening my awareness of the terrible, terrible cost of materialism, and also without really going into the whole story right now. I'll just say this: I'm drawing this more quickly to an end than I normally would. I really am trying to stay with this, for me, extraordinary goal of turning an episode round in 36 hours. It's about 36 hours since I started putting this together, and I've just been, that's how long it's taken. It's been my entire focus, I could say apart from the time I slept, but probably I took it into my sleep as well. I want to turn this round in 36 hours and see how it feels. I'm not quite satisfied, but I'm just going to let this be, loose ends or not. But I will just say this: yes, maybe, in more episodes I will get to more of this personal story of what these extraordinary last few months have been about. They've been about many, many things. The things I've just been speaking about feeling people's despair about the church, and realizing how very different I am is part of that. Because the church is the miracle of my life. I think it's partly because, I'm not a cradle Catholic. It's partly because I was really searching for, something like 20 years of my life, and I've gone through all kinds of Eastern spirituality and psychotherapy and New Age spirituality, and Nothing I ever found could give me what the church has given me. And what the church has given me is not inspiring bishops and priests and, although there have been plenty along the way, especially priests who've really touched me and inspired me. There have been many of those. But it's not the human side of the church that I am holding up here. I'm holding up the supernatural side of the church. I feel differently when I really participate in the sacraments of the church. In fact, one of the hardest things in recent years were the lockdowns, the first lockdown especially. I really became more depressed than I can remember for something like 20 years during that first lockdown, and it was clear to be cut off from the sacraments was a tremendous pain for me. And I don't quite understand how many people, and I'm seeing it happen, can walk away from the sacraments. I actually feel like saying to some people who want to walk away from the church, don't go to the sacraments less, go more. Go try it 7 days a week. Even if you have to, really put up with the most oafish kind of priest celebrating the most oafish kind of liturgy. And no, that is not a defense of the new Mass. It is a testimony to the supernatural power of the Mass. But the last thing I want to do is defend this new liturgy. I really do believe that the new liturgy is the product of this utilitarian, rationalist mind. It is both begotten by the kind of new liberal Catholics that dominated at Vatican II and afterwards, who did not have the supernatural perspective, or they'd lost the supernatural perspective. They had utilitarian concerns. It's both begotten of that kind of mindset, and it also yields that kind of mindset as well, in very subtle ways. I'm very clear about this. I've been clear about this on the channel, in my books, in the website for many years, and I really, maybe I just give a little tribute to people that I've spoken about in the past, whether it's Joseph Shaw or Peter Kwasniewski, who are doing so much to point out how this Mass is deficient and how this Mass suffers from rationalism, utilitarianism. So really what I'm saying here is a testimony to supernatural power. It's J.R.R. Tolkien spoke about the only cure for sagging faith is to go to the Mass. He said something like this: 7 times a week is far more powerful than at wide intervals. There is an incredible power in frequent or daily communion, and that's what I want to do, is testify to that. The supernatural power of the church, I need to point to it because what is going on in the story that I thought I was going to say more about it, a little bit more about it. Some of it is necessarily, quite private. But what is really going on is, a sharpening and intensifying of the story that I've been with all these years. How do we respond to the world falling ever more deeply into materialism? And what I've been saying is that for many years now, my answer has been Tomberg's answer. Fidelity to the church, honoring the church, participating in the sacraments of the church, submitting to the discipline of the church, all those things that Tomberg encouraged, and a process of meditative deepening. And I found, and I repeat, that the sacraments and Eucharistic adoration really contribute to this meditative deepening. They really contribute to dropping into concentration without effort. I say dropping into because there's nothing forced about this. One doesn't, if one weren't dropping into it, if one were concentrating in the normal way, one wouldn't be dropping into it. What I mean by dropping into concentration without effort is a place of silence, as Tomberg writes about, where tension falls away. And I don't manage that every day, but I find that the Mass and Eucharistic adoration, regular confession of my sin, all of that is facilitating concentration without effort. And it's facilitating, I hope and believe, the zone of silence within the soul, the zone of silence, that I can hopefully look at the world and look at people with that silence in me in hopefully a more virginal way, rather than have my, whole head cluttered up with stuff. Of course, we're very, very broken people, and the modern world is filled with clutter, so it's very, very hard work to remain uncluttered. And without the sacraments, I don't think I could be cultivating this zone of silence in my own soul. But as I look out at the world, the continued fall into materialism, the continued fall into subjectivism, Sebastian Morello writes about that very well as well. Subjectivism. We can just be whatever we want, with no reality checks to any objective reality out there. So yes, my story of the last weeks has made that even more real to me. There's something else I want to say about people feeling such pain about the church, but we're not going to go into it very much now. I want to point to the fact that in his final writings, Lazarus Come Forth, we're going to do a whole episode about this, I hope. Tomberg has, for me, an incredibly inspirational passage where he, some people will find this very speculative, I know, but speaks about the church regularly being regenerated. The church going into the darkest times, such as the Arian crisis, 3rd or 4th century, or the barbarian invasions, that the Benedictine monasteries saved us from, or the Reformation. And what happened at the time of the Reformation, the way Tomberg writes about it, and it certainly seems true to me, is that the church had decayed. He speaks about the church in its human side regularly degenerating and then regenerating. And it seems to me that someone like Luther was at a point of deep degeneration of the church. Tomberg critiques Luther in his writings. He speaks about the Lutheran heresy. Too much to go into now. But yes, the church does seem to be at a point in its human side of tremendous degeneration. But I don't see the value in beginning to go the way of Martin Luther. I feel that although Luther was absolutely right to see the awful things that he did, he was not right to forget about the supernatural power of the sacraments. And he was not right to think that these could continue by rebellion against Rome. So many issues here, but this is an attempt to abruptly finish things off, more abruptly than I thought. Maybe the final things that I should just really point to are Sebastian's book. I'm going to say that there is a link down below in the text. There will be a link down below in the text where you can buy it. If you buy it through the link, you'll help me and help what I'm trying to do here. So that goes for the links to my own books as well and my Amazon author page. And I'll be putting Sebastian's book, up at the website soon when I get a moment to do that. Maybe just in speaking about Sebastian's book, I want to say that there is so much I passed over, so much in this book that I have not mentioned. What can I say? The book is filled with history, it's filled with soteriology, it's filled with, philosophy and theology and mysticism and magic. But maybe what it's really filled with is, I feel like there's also a tremendous appreciation of the natural world and God's glory shining through the natural world. The book has a shining quality. Something shines through his words that is very moving for me. But ultimately, there is a deep, deep, deep faith in Christ. There is a deep awareness of the Christian mystery, the Catholic mystery, that Christ has overcome the fall. And if you really attend to Sebastian Morello's book, you'll not only have all the things that I'm speaking about, like, the things I've tried to highlight more in the book, like, the emergence of the modern mind, the emergence of the mind that, Sebastian is saying Descartes did not so much forge. No, this modern mind mysteriously emerged, and Descartes expressed it in this anthropocentric shift, which then, goes right through to the, great theologians of modern times like Bultmann, who wants to demythologize Christianity and, deny, our Lord's resurrection or deny the virgin birth, because, we all know now that miracles don't happen. That's kind of like, an expression of Rudolf Bultmann's liberal Protestantism. And that then begins to feed into the kind of liberal Catholicism of Karl Rahner and people like that who achieved such a stunning victory at the Second Vatican Council. Not only does Sebastian Morello have so much insight to offer us, about modernity and, how we can respond to modernity, but the whole book is laced with this profound and beautiful understanding of the Christian mystery. The book also has a really splendid foreword by Charles Coulombe. I really cannot recommend the book highly enough. I have said, in the course of this, that I'm not in complete agreement with everything that Sebastian says, and I'm not, I have no intention, in getting into any kind of, debate about where I agree with him and where I disagree. But I find the book immensely, immensely valuable and stimulating. It's been an incredible blessing to me over these last months. So I want to really thank you. Thank you, Sebastian, for this amazing, contentious, beautiful book. I think it can really do great things. So I wanted to say that, and I think the very last thing I'll say before I finish, more abruptly than I thought, is that I do want to say again that we have this members program now. I've not been able to push forward with it in the way that I want to due to the intensity of the last weeks, but what I'm speaking about is the Buy Me a Coffee program. We have a Buy Me a Coffee page where people can make a one-off donation, but we're also trying to get a little members group off the ground where people will have some exclusive content as well. So I just wanted to mention the Buy Me a Coffee scheme. I'm not going to go more into that now. Thank you for listening to all of this if you've got through to the end, and God bless you, friends.